I think we can get going here. This is the first part of this chapter. I broke it up into 2 lectures. There's clues to tell you how far it goes, although it doesn't really matter because there's one quiz covering both parts. So the iPhone changed the world, of course. It was a big deal. And when it started, it was really not very secure at all. Although I should say, in practice, it was always very secure. What it started out as was something that was very limited. There were no apps. There was no way to install any apps, so there wasn't much of any way to take the thing over. Of course, from the beginning, you didn't have the control over your phone. This is something people were used to from the old days of Bakelite phones where you had to rent the phone. So Steve Jobs based his OS on Unix, and Objective-C is the language used to program apps. They're compiled just like x86 and x64 apps down to binary assembly code, binary machine code, which can be disassembled to assembly code, but it cannot easily be reversed back to anything that's easy to read. So that makes it all much more obscure than Android apps, which have Smalley that's very easy to read. So anyway, the iPhone came out here, kind of a limited version of OS X, which was based on Unix. And many other Apple devices came out running versions of iOS here. They all run on ARM. Now it's 64-bit ARM, but when it started it was 32-bit ARM. ARM is different than x86 at the assembly code level. We'll be looking at the code later, and you'll see it's not that different, but it's a little weird. So originally, there were no third-party apps at all. The only thing you could do is use the apps that Apple built into the phone, like a browser, to browse the web, and one of the things that made people shocked is there was no Flash on there, and there's no Java on there, and that means there's really not much of any way to take over the phone through a web page. So the thing was pretty secure, even without having any major security barriers, just by not having any exposed surface that you could attack very much. But when the App Store came out, this was a big deal, and that meant you were going to have third-party developers writing apps, and the apps were a new attack surface. So they had to do things about this. So in the early days, you ran all processes as root, so every process had access to the entire phone, and there was no code signing and no address-based layout randomization. So this thing was sort of like a Windows 95 box. So it did not have the ability to support relocating things in RAM, so it couldn't have address-based layout randomization. So as the different versions went by, they started moving the third-party apps to another user account, which is sandboxing. That's how the sandboxing works. It's the same in Android. Each app runs under a different user account, and it has ownership of a different folder, so one app can't look at another app's data unless it can escalate to root. So you need a kernel exploit to defeat the internal permission structure of Unix for one app to go to somewhere else. And the apps have to be signed by Apple, which is really powerful, and it's just amazing to me how much Android doesn't have this. So you can only install apps from the App Store, and only if they're signed by Apple, which means Apple has to approve every app, and they examine them to try to remove the malicious ones. Now, they haven't been perfect at that. A few malicious ones have slipped in, but there's a non-technical enforcement procedure that is very effective, which is you can't put anything in the App Store without them knowing who you are, and if you put in anything bad, they kick you out of the program, and you can never sell another app. And that scares away all the people that wanted to do bad things in practice very well. They also check to see if you're modifying apps, so the code signature is verified at runtime as well as load time. By the way, a dirty little secret of code signing, which I saw at one of these security conferences, is when you sign code, you don't really sign 100% of the code. I don't know why this is, but Windows signed executables have several sections that are not included in the signature. And I think the same thing's true of iOS apps. So code signing is not as perfect as it sounds, but it's a big step forward. So then they added address-based layout randomization for it all, and therefore they needed partition-independent executables. And now you can't tell where you are in RAM when you're running an app, and that makes it more difficult to exploit memory corruption vulnerabilities, because even if you can inject some code, it's hard to find it, to run it. Right, and then, of course, iPhone 3GS, this is probably the most important thing. Now, the big thing that happened is people started stealing the iPhone just to wipe it and sell it for money. So the FBI contacted Apple and said, please make it possible to cancel these things like credit cards to cut down on the crime. And that means encrypt them, so that the new user can't get at it and wipe it clean. And this started with version 3 and later got stronger and stronger until the FBI said, wait a minute, why did you encrypt it? We can't get in. And Apple said, we really, really, really hate you if you would just make up your mind. And so, but anyway, so it has a cryptographic accelerator, a coprocessor, which does the decryption. And the end result is it's fast enough that you don't notice it. And it's cheap enough in battery life that you can still run the thing all day on one charge, which is a thing Android never seems to have succeeded, except perhaps in the latest devices, to actually have something you can encrypt that also has a good battery life. And this means you can wipe an iPhone and sell it without any fear of anyone getting the data, because all of it has been being encrypted right from the very start. The encryption is on by default. Every app, every password, every email address, everything you put on it was encrypted. So in order to wipe it clean, all you have to do is delete the key. And so it's just a write of a few bytes, the key is gone, and that makes it safe enough to sell the device to a new person. So you wipe it here, just go into general settings, there's a reset option, and it says reset to factory defaults, and it's not kidding. In a few seconds, all your data is gone. A third-party research company bought, I think, 100 used iPhones, and they ran forensic tools on them trying to steal data, and they verified that you can't get any usable data off a wiped iPhone, which is very nice. So you can resell it if you want to, but nowadays, if you lock it to iCloud and turn on Find My iPhone, nobody can wipe it and reuse it without your iCloud password. So that accomplishes both of the things that make the FBI happy. Nobody can steal the data off the phone when you give it to someone else, and nobody can steal your phone and use it in any way. All they can do is throw it in the trash. So this is the most secure operating system for computing, is to use an iPad or an iPhone. There's nothing else you can use that is more free of malware and more free of security problems. It's not perfect, of course. For example, you can surf to a website that then has you log in with plain text authentication, and then your password is being thrown all over the internet without protection, but the phone can't really save you from that, at least not yet. Browsers are beginning to move in this direction, where they will actually refuse to let you send your password without encryption. Probably in a few years, that'll just be a feature in the browsers. But at the moment, it is fairly common that people use plain text authentication on the web, and people wouldn't be happy if browsers just blocked it entirely. But anyway, the phone itself is quite secure. Another thing that can happen is it can store your data on the phone without adding more encryption to it, but everything is encrypted in case someone steals it. So if they can't get through your passcode, they still can't get anything stored on the device. Anyway, you cannot put security apps on your phone. You cannot add any virus, you cannot add a firewall. Apple does not let those things go in the store because you don't need them. Their premise is the thing is just safe. It's like the way machines were in the 90s when you just used computers and didn't worry about security. And that's more or less the way life is on iPhones. There are no spreading viruses for unlocked iPhones out there. There are a few proof of concept attacks we'll talk about next time, but you can still, of course, take over an iPhone. The NSA does it all the time. The people on top of crime syndicates do it. The FBI used to be able to do it on older models by just connecting with a USB cable, jailbreaking, and taking all the data for forensic analysis. Now they can't do that so easily anymore. But the point is, it is possible to target a user and hit them with an attack, but those exploits are not commonly available anymore. They cost something like $1 million on the open market. So although they exist, they are inside the intelligence agency and the large crime syndicates, and normal poor hackers don't have much of a way to get at them except through underground channels. I got a few iClicker questions. Come grab one if you need one. All right. So what processor is on a new iPhone? All right, it's 64-bit ARM, which is not on the list, so it's E. All right, so what's the security measure, which is a compile time option in Xcode? All right, I think it's the position-independent executable. Let me just flip back and make sure I got that right. It was just something you specify at compile time. So that was back here. Yeah, PIE is compile time in Xcode. Now, I imagine that means that if you run old apps that don't have Pi turned on, then they will not randomize in memory. And I know the same thing is true of Windows. Even Windows Server 2016, if you run old code, this defense can't save you. because the old code doesn't have the ability to be randomized. So it is position-independent executables, not code signing. Because you can't do that, only Apple can do that. You can compile your code and run it on a phone that you set to allow side loading of unsigned apps, but only Apple can sign it in a way that matters here. All right, so what measure prevents apps from being modified? All right, and that's code signing. Code signing uses public key cryptography to sign a hash number for the app, which will change if you change any bytes that are signed, and it can be verified by anybody with a public key, but it can only be signed by Apple, who holds the private key. That's the point. So it's really an almost perfect system. The only thing that can go wrong with it is if your keys are so short they can be guessed, and that's easy to avoid, or if somebody manages to steal the private key from somebody like Apple, and occasionally that happens, although not to Apple. To some smaller companies like Chinese manufacturers of hardware, they had their code signing keys stolen a few times, or perhaps stolen through bribery or something. But anyway, as far as I know, nobody ever stole a private key from Apple. All right, so which measure makes the memory location of apps random? All right, and that's ASLR, address space layout randomization. All right, come on, there we go. All right, which one makes it faster to wipe the phone? As you probably know, if you want to wipe a desktop computer like what I'm using here, it takes hours. Run something like Derek's boot and nuke, and it has to write all over the drive, and some people like to do multiple passes. It's like an overnight job.
Literally.
What's that?
Literally.
It is, yeah. But not an iPhone. Because you've been encrypting it, all you have to do is delete the key. It's a matter of less than a second. All right. Okay, so jailbreaking. Of course, if you don't jailbreak your phone, you enjoy all those security features, but you can only do what Apple wants you to do. And in particular, Apple does not want you taking apps off the phone and reverse engineering them, which is exactly what we're here to do. So you have to defeat Apple's rules, because we're going to hack into the apps and see how they work and mess with them. That's the fun stuff. So first you have to get Apple out of the way. So the point is, this is kind of crazy, and this led to the strange thing that hackers would find vulnerabilities and they would very carefully not tell Apple, because they wanted to use them to jailbreak the phone and let other people jailbreak the phone, so they would not tell Apple and then suddenly make a big splash. The jailbreak is available. Everybody jailbreak really fast before Apple puts up the patch. And this is why you don't want to put patches on your phone if you want to jailbreak it, which means you're going to have to be using an older version with known vulnerabilities. Now, there are some ways to put on patches later, but basically, if you jailbreak an iPhone, you lower its security, but you gain control of it. So it's a thing to be aware of. A lot of phones are jailbreaking. Your book says studies show something like 5 to 10% of all iPhones are jailbroken, because I think the primary reason people do it is to get access to stolen iPhone apps, because people can now hack the apps and distribute them stolen for free, and that's the most popular thing. But the actual technical skill of jailbreaking the phone is pretty awesome, and that's what we'd like to touch on here. You know, these people talk about this, whether you'd rather be safe or you'd rather be free. And Apple chose to make people safe, and I think Apple is entirely correct that 99% of users are content to just use the normal apps and not have to worry about anything, or I guess I should say 95% of them. Only 5% of them want to jailbreak it in order to do something with it that Apple doesn't like. So this is where you take full control of your iDevice, iPhone, iPad, iPod, whatever it is. If you happen to do it at the right time, you can just go to a website and swipe something, poof, and now it's jailbroken, because that's what people do when they have a good jailbreak. Those haven't been out in years, though. Once you do, you get access to Cydia, which is the underground app store that has all the pirate apps, or the unapproved by Apple apps. They're not all illegal, although quite a few of them are. They're all just things Apple doesn't like. All right, and code signing is now disabled, so you can run anything you want. And therefore, of course, you can download malware and run it on your phone now, so you're no longer protected by Apple. One thing that really, really annoyed me is I discovered that if you make a backup of your phone in iTunes and jailbreak it, and then restore it later, it doesn't get back to being unjailbroken. It gets back to looking like that, but it's not really the same. That's why Apple's point of view is you have voided your warranty, and we're going to turn your face to the wall and disown you. Never come ask us for help again after you jailbreak your phone. You're now in the dark zone. And that's how it goes. So anyway, you are running an exploit on your phone. This means you are intrinsically using a hack. Therefore, you're using something which might be poorly understood and might do some harm. Some exploits do harm. The other thing is you are totally trusting these random hackers that wrote the jailbreak. I mean, they're taking over your phone, running code. In practice, you may remember the Linux community likes to say everyone here just loves curiosity and they're writing all this great stuff. And then occasionally you have problems like Heartbleed when people say, wait a minute, why do we just take random stuff written by amateurs all over the world and run it and trust all our important data to it? But in practice, the jailbreaking community has been a pretty positive community where people just love to do it. And not too many people would put malware in a jailbreak, but they certainly could. And how would you ever know? They're hacking into your phone anyway. So anyway, that's the game here. In principle, you can brick your device. Yeah.
I just want to say that people actually look at what other people write, and so people who release stuff, they have this credibility, they have this reputation.
Yeah.
So when other people look at their stuff and they would find bad things, that would basically completely destroy them. It would be really bad. So there's a large incentive for them to not do it because other people look over the stuff, and if there's a problem, then they would not.
Yeah, that's right. I appreciate it. And also, this is the whole Linux open source thing. So instead of trusting a rich corporation to protect you because they're rich, which is the American way, you have the sort of communist way. You trust this community of people that sort of, you like to talk to each other and you trust them. And, it's arguable which trust model suits you. Anyway, in principle, you can brick your device so it won't even boot up. Certainly, you void your warranty as far as Apple's concerned. So like I say, even if you back it up first, there is no way back to a non-jailbroken state, not that I know of, although a reset to factory defaults might do it. I didn't try that. And certainly if you use the jailbroken device, you can use DD to copy all the stuff back, so you probably could make a full backup, but I don't know how you can make a full backup before you jailbreak it. Anyway, yeah, is there a way to jet back?
Yeah, so you can do a full backup in iThings before you jailbreak, but then like in order to remove the jailbreak, you have to not just reset the factory defaults, but basically do a complete new restore in iThings.
Okay.
After you do that, that should erase both the system partition and the user partition.
No.
So then it should be clean.
That's what
you have to do a restore in iThings.
That's what I did. Okay, well, I just did recover from backup. Okay, but the thing I found was some of the old folders are there. All the iTunes backup does is back up the folders that Apple thinks you're going to change. And when you run hack code, it adds other things that does not remove.
Well, it's not the folders that you're going to change, but more specifically, there are two partitions.
Okay.
There's a system partition that has only code that Apple counts with the iPhone, the IPSW, that's put on the root partition.
Okay.
And then you have a secondary partition with the user data.
Okay.
So that whole thing should be backed up, and that's where you're going to restore. But when you jailbreak your phone, it will modify both partitions. So unless you do a complete format, which is a restore in iTunes, that will format both partitions.
So restore back to factory.
You will only modify the root partition, and that means your user partition will still have different stuff lying around.
So you'd have to lose all your apps and all your data.
Well, if you have a backup, then you can bring it back.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, anyway. So now you're not protected by Apple. It's now your responsibility to protect yourself. And in fact, the jailbreak community has pushed forward Apple security, which is what the ethical hackers always say, is that all these hackers are actually inventive and creative and promote security, but corporations are always nervous about the fact that the ethical hackers are not under anybody's control. Anyway, so if you are sloppy and you jailbreak your phone and you don't know what you're doing, you can easily make it less safe. And the simplest thing is if you jailbreak it and put on SSH, it has a known default password, and then you become like all the Internet of Things devices where anybody can just take it over at any time. It's legal right now, which is why I'm doing it. Last time I taught this class, it was illegal to jailbreak your iPhone. Lots of people do it anyway. I'm not aware of anyone going to prison for it, but in a public institution like this, I can't have projects assigned for homework that are illegal, or some clown could sue the college for $1 million and there'd be a lot of trouble. Yeah.
But what happened in the past was there was a hacker who hacked the PlayStation. He was a very famous
Right, that was GeoHot, right?
And he was sued by Sony.
Yeah, by Sony, but not by Apple.
Right.
As far as I know, Apple hasn't sued any jailbreakers. The only people I know that actually got shut down by Apple was a company that made Hackintoshes and sold them. They hacked OS 10, they put it on a PC, they sold them, and they said they were Macs, and they were crappy and crashed all the time. And Apple let them go on for about 2 years before they squashed them like a bug. You really have to work hard to be an idiot before Apple will bother squashing you. But anyway, so now it is legal for a while. This is because of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which makes it impossible to overcome any barrier to prevent you from accessing code. Unless you get an exception, and the exceptions are granted only in 3-year blocks, so it's now legal for the next couple of years to jailbreak your iPhone. So, you're right, legal through 2018 for phones and tablets. Now, another thing, which I know Obama said should be legal for everything, is unlocking, which is not jailbreaking to get root access and totally control the phone. It's just releasing you from your carrier so you can move from Sprint to AT&T or Verizon. So I don't know if that's going to survive the current administration, but under Obama that was declared to be permanently legal. He thought that was only reasonable that you could move from one carrier to another. Anyway, so there's different ways to do it. One technique is to take over the boot process, push a firmware image to the device. This is how it was first done on the older devices. Then remote jailbreaking is much more convenient, where you just open a web page. The web page has something like a PDF exploit that hacks into the phone and lets you in. It's very nice. That's what jailbreakme.com did. I helped my friend jailbreak her phone about 5 years ago because she was going to Spain and she wanted to change to Orange. And at that time, all you had to do was open a browser, go to jailbreakme.com and go swipe, and now it's jailbroken. That works only for certain old versions. Then there are jailbreaks that you download and run, and that's what you'll do if you do a jailbreaking project in the lab. Corona Absinthe, Evasion, another one called Green Poison. There's a bunch of these from different hacking teams that work them out. And the last jailbreakable version, I think, is version 7. There's no jailbreak for the latest updated 8, I think. I think it's what I found is maybe 8 or 9. I think the ones we have, the iPhones, the iPads in the lab, I think they're 835. No, they're 935. 935, there's no jailbreak. I'm not sure about 8. Is there a jailbreak for 8?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Anyway, 9 or 10, though, if you have updated your 9 or 10 to the latest version, there is no known way to jailbreak it. Yeah?
Actually, one has been released recently for 10 up to 10.2. So.
Oh, but not up to the latest one.
But it's not for all devices because there's only support for like the newer ones. So.
Okay.
If you have an old phone like the one that you have, the iPhone 5, that cannot be jailbroken. But a newer phone like an iPhone 6 Plus, that can be jailbroken.
Cool. Okay. And which group put that out?
It was one of the best iPhone hackers from Italy. So not really a group, just best independent research out there.
I'd like to see it. All right, so a tethered jailbreak is the first kind of jailbreak someone might develop, but it's really not very popular because a tethered jailbreak means you've subverted the boot process and you can only reboot it while connected to a PC. So you can't reboot your phone alone. If you do, it won't be jailbroken anymore, so you have to connect to the PC every time you reboot it. So it gives you some ability to hack into the phone, but certainly what most people want is an untethered jailbreak, so your phone is portable and you can restart it any time and it will come back the same way. All right, I got a few iClicker questions. All right, what security measure do you lose by jailbreaking? All right, you lose code signing, of course, that was the whole point. Now you can run unapproved code. So how many of these risks are you going to get if you jailbreak your phone? The answer to this changes with time. All right, right now I think only 3 of them. You might put on Trojans, you might break your phone, and you're definitely going to avoid your warranty. Neither of those is going to happen to you, at least in the US right now. And even outside, it's unlikely neither of them would happen to you. I think in fact, there are commercial places you can take your phone and they'll jailbreak it for money, and Apple doesn't even seem to shut them down. Although in principle, they probably could, except during this 3-year period when it's legal. Anyway, I think they probably don't want to push it. Most of the copyright law issues people try to keep out of court because there's serious questions how much this would really hold up. Anyway, so if you jailbreak your iPad, how much of this nasty stuff could happen to you? All right, and right now the answer is the same, 3. Last time I taught this course, one of them was legal and the other wasn't. I think iPhones were legal and iPads weren't, because they could not find a legal definition of a tablet. When they tried to describe exactly what makes a tablet and makes it different than, say, a laptop or a portable computer, they couldn't figure out what it was. The phone, they could say, is the thing that makes phone calls. So they could define what a phone was and legalize it, but they couldn't legalize a tablet without legalizing everything. This is the kind of stuff that might sound stupid, but if you actually get involved with the law, this is the problem. I mean, I used to have the typical hacker's frustration that lawyers and the government are all just stupid, messing up my life. And then I went to the talks with the Department of Justice and the legal team at B-Sides Las Vegas, and they said, you know, when you write a law, you have to explain exactly what is evil about this activity, and it has to somehow really be clear whether you broke the law or not, and that is just not easy. All right, what kind of jailbreak means you cannot restart your phone without being connected to a computer? All right, and that's tethered. As you'd imagine, you're sort of trapped, connected to your PC in some extent. What's best for older devices? In the book, they say you use the boot process boots for the really old ones, like before the iPhone 4. Anyway, the iPhone 4 you can do with a remote jailbreak, if it isn't totally patched, but some of the others you can't. Anyway, I think we ought to take a break, then we'll carry on and I'll demonstrate the IDA Pro stuff. We're going to do some very simple things with IDA Pro today. Nothing too complicated, but you got 10 minutes. All right, so here's the game for a boot-based jailbreak. You download the firmware from Apple. You have to get the right version for the iOS version and your hardware version. Then you download your jailbreak software, of which there are various versions. Then you connect by USB so your computer can write onto the device. You run this app, and it tells you, it detects when you're connected, and then you click some kind of button to say jailbreak. Then you find the file that contains Apple firmware. You put your device in firmware update mode by holding certain buttons for 10 seconds to reach a sort of hidden mode, which is the equivalent of Android USB debugging mode. And now your jailbreak app writes strange software out of the device. I must say I was glad I had experience with Linux, because I had a new iPad, which was really cool at that time. It cost $1,000. And when I did this, the first thing that happens is it just goes black and dead for like 2 minutes. Then it opens up with red error messages screaming, error, error, crash, crash, warning, warning, going off screen. Then it goes black again. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, man. Then it comes back with tiny green error messages that are upside down that scroll around all over the screen saying error, crash, failure. And I said, man, I'm glad I'm used to using Linux, because every time Linux, every program you run has a bunch of screaming, yelling, especially hacking tools, and you just ignore it and keep going. And then it like wakes up and comes back and you've got Cydia. And I said, man, you know, my first thought is, I just ruined this $1,000 thing. But it's, that's the way hacking tools are when they work. There's 100 errors, but they don't matter. Just ignore them. It'll be fine. Including the jailbreak in this class. After you do the jailbreak in this class, it tells you your phone has run out of space, when that's absolutely false, but this is a known feature of the jailbreaking. At one stage during the rebooting, it thinks it's out of space. The correct thing to do is just don't worry about it and keep going. Anyway, when you're done, you will have Cydia on your desktop. And therefore, you can now go to the unrestricted app store and install all these delightful hack things, and you can, in principle, put back all the missing pieces of Unix, which is what I did the first time I did this. You can put in a whole bunch of developer tools so you can really run command line Unix and compile code on the thing and all that, which I did, but in retrospect, it was kind of a silly thing to do. I mean, compiling code on your portable device is sort of for the birds. You should compile it on your computer and push it on there, but you know. All right, the remote jailbreak is much, much easier. You don't download anything, you don't plug in the USB cable, you don't boot it into a funny mode, you just open a web page and click a button on a web page. But it only works if you have a particularly vulnerable old version of the device. That's jailbreakme.com. Jailbreakme.com, if you open it from a PC, it won't open. It'll only open from an iPhone. And then you see this opportunity to break your device, but it only works for really old devices. All right, but then you might want to hack into somebody else's iPhone. which is certainly possible. The NSA does it all the time. And Charlie Miller is the expert at this, and Charlie Miller used to work for the NSA. Now he quit, and he does iPhone hacking as a private security researcher. And he says, I'm not allowed to tell you what I did at the NSA, but you could probably guess. And he is the world's expert at hacking into your iPhone. He will find ways to get in. However, you have to be a really good hacker to do this. Most of the ways you hack into a PC are just not available. There's no Flash, there's no Java, you can't run a browser plugin, you can't download and execute any code except from the App Store, and Apple will bust you if you put malicious things in the App Store, so it's pretty tough. In fact, he did that at one point. He put a malicious app in the App Store, and they banned him for life. Now he can't put any apps in the App Store. That's Charlie Miller. However, now he's hacking cars. He seems to be doing all right, even without Apple's help. But all right, you can try to attack it over the network, but man, now of course, if it's a jailbroken device, then it's going to have SSH running. You don't have to have SSH on a jailbroken device, but typically you do. And if they haven't changed the password, it's got a default password, and then you've got root Alpine. So that's hardly even hacking. That's just a wide open door to walk through. But there are other attack vectors available. You can try to come in with local network access, connect to a malicious access point. Then you can, if you can get physical access to it with a USB cable, then you can try to jailbreak it if it's an old enough version with any of these jailbreaks, and then you've got the ability to get in. There are a few exploits in mobile Safari, where you can do things you shouldn't be able to do through a website. You can also deliver some files by email and download them as email attachment, at least get the files on the device. But these things are pretty rare. It just has less vulnerabilities than you'd expect. Here's a few remote code vulnerabilities in mobile Safari from 2011. So there are times when you can do something through Safari, but not that much. The third-party apps also have vulnerabilities, of course. The apps can be poorly written and have weaknesses, but if you exploit an app, you've only got that app's permissions, so you can steal the data that belongs to that app, but unless you also find a kernel exploit, you're not going to be able to get root and wander into other places. So the most practical kind of attack is to target old versions. Use exploits that are new before people update their devices, and that's possible, but most of the effort goes into jailbreaking, because that's what most people want to do. And there are, of course, zero-day attacks that Apple does not know and that nobody else knows about, and they sell for $1 million. So they're not easy to make at all, and there are a few of them out there, but only the elite people can use them. All right, so I got a few iClickers about that stuff. What's at jailbreakme.com? All right, that's a remote jailbreak. That's what's nice.
But it's
Yeah.
untethered.
It's also untethered, isn't it? Yeah, I think you're right. That's the better answer. E is probably a better answer. Okay, fair enough. Good. All right. What appears on your jailbroken phone? All right, Cydia, of course. All right. All right, so which one of these works only on jailbroken devices? Anyway, the special thing about jailbroken devices is the default SSH password. So that's the special vulnerability they have. And there is no SSH on a non-jailbroken device. You can't have it. So that does fulfill the requirements of the question, although I'm not very proud of that question. Anyway, so which one relies on security flaws in mobile Safari? All right. And that's, of course, a client-side vulnerability. It's really just a tautology. All right. And the last one. If an app wants to read data from another app, what kind of flaw does it need? All right, so it needs a kernel vulnerability. It needs to somehow escalate to root. All right, so I'll grade these iClickers a bit later. What I want to do now is talk a bit about the projects and show you some stuff. So I saw a lot of people working on these Android projects, which is fine. They're really quite easy. Once you get your Genymotion working, you can easily suck the Android apps down and examine them and watch them do foolish things like transmit unencrypted passwords over the internet and store them locally and such foolish things. And last time we talked about this SSL auditing proxy, where you take a Mac and turn it into a router that performs a man-in-the-middle attack on all the traffic, and now you can have any kind of device going through it and easily audit the network traffic and see if it is using plain text or if it is using broken SSL that fails to validate your certificates. And so there's a Hopper project here, which I'm not going to demonstrate today because I'm currently confined to a PC here, but I'm going to look at IDA Pro. IDA Pro runs on any operating system. And one thing which I learned from the iOS hacking book, there's 2 free versions of IDA Pro. I've been using IDA Pro Free, which is the old one, which cannot do ARM code, but there's an IDA Pro demo, which is newer, which can do it. So that's the one you have to get for here. So as we talked about before, using some tools, which is in a couple of the extra credit projects, you can jailbreak your iPhone and then decrypt the app and pull down the app in a decrypted form by installing appropriate hacking tools on the iPhone itself after you've jailbroken it. And when you're done, you get this IPA file. And that IPA file contains the entire app, just like there is an Android file, an APK file that contains the whole app. So I did that, and in order to make it so you can do this project even if you don't have access to a jailbroken iPhone, I just broke them up into pieces. So there's one project where you jailbreak the iPhone, and then a project where you learn how to suck down an app, and I made those extra credit because there's only a certain number of phones up there. But you can all do this because you can download all the pieces. So you just download from my website the Stitcher app in its decrypted form. Then you unzip it with 7-zip, and you get this stuff, the payload Stitcher app, and in here is a whole bunch of files showing you all the images and everything this app uses. And the one thing with the name equal to Stitcher, equal to the name of the app, is going to be the executable, and there it is. And that's going to be larger, 15 megs. Not all that big, but that's the main executable, and when you run it, it then uses those images and stuff to draw things. So this is where the actual code is, and we want to reverse engineer that file. So you have to get IDA demo version, which will run on any OS, Windows, Linux, or Mac. So I'm just using the Windows version here. And let's play with it. So IDA demo. All right, there it is. There are some limitations on the demo version, but they're really not bad at all. It will just pop up a box every 5 or 10 minutes reminding you it's the demo version and keep running. You can't save any preferences or anything. So you can examine something, but you can't really do multiple sessions of tagging it and labeling it, which is what you have to do if you're really going to get into this stuff. But you can do simple things to see how it works, which is what we're going to do here. So I can disassemble a file, a new file. The file I want to disassemble is, of course, that executable I showed you. So it is here. And it's not an exe file. I have to go to all files to see it because the Stitcher app has no extension. And IDA Pro or IDA Demo is not prepared for that. So I have to tell it to open all files. Now I can open Stitcher. Now we will notice that what it is a mock-O file for ARM7. I don't quite know what it means, but mock-O is the type of files these things are, ARM executables. There are different versions of ARM2, and some files will actually not be sure which version to use, but this one gives you only one choice, so life is easy. What it's going to do now is it's going to take the machine code and attempt to disassemble it into assembly code we can read. The process is not perfect. And if you take the malware analysis class, we'll talk about anti-disassembly. You can write code that cannot be disassembled by these automated processes by adding extra bytes that shouldn't be there to confuse the disassembler. So it's going to try to disassemble it, and you can adjust various parameters to choose how it's going to do it here, but we're just going to take the default. It is a slow process. It takes about 3 minutes to disassemble the thing. It's going to tell you what it's doing. It's going to have an output window here with, it's now up to 32 stages, 32 steps into it. It's going to ask me some question, do I want to parse them and rename methods? I do. This means, I think what this is saying, is it asking me whether the recognized libraries should be referred to by their library name, by their entry name, which is what I want, which takes more time but makes the code more readable. Anyway, so it continues doing stuff, and let's see what comes up. I think it was faster in my virtual machine, but anyway. Oh, there we go, good. It's doing stuff. Okay, now it's telling me another message about something, ARM and thumb, the encoding mode. I have no idea what this means, so I just say okay. Somebody else might have a clue. All right, now you might think it's done. Yeah, you know what it means?
Yeah, so on ARM processors, there are actually two different modes that the processor can be in.
Yeah.
On Intel, you only have one, but on ARM, you have two.
Wow. Which one is the iPhone using?
Yeah, so this is not for users, it's just for the developers and how the instructions are written. Because you have machine code, which is the actual zeros and ones that the CPU executes. And there are two different ways to integrate. One is used for simpler code that then can be shorter. Because you have thumb code, which is shorter instruction form that doesn't have as many possibilities, but it's good enough for most purposes. So in most cases,
and that's thumb code?
Right. So it's shorter. It's basically half the length of an instruction, but it doesn't encode everything. So a lot of the code will be in thumb because the function is simple enough that it doesn't need the more complicated version. But some code that doesn't support that will be in the more extended version, which is just called ARM.
And I guess I just approved it guessing.
Yeah, you have to do that because otherwise it wouldn't be able to read the code.
Okay. Anyway, I wanted to mention it's not done yet because look at this bar. This bar up here is showing you your location in the code. The entire app goes from here to here. And right now it's brown, and brown is stuff it hasn't processed yet. When it's done, see, it's still going. It might look dumb, but you see something still counting down here. It's still working. And when it's working, most of this will turn to dark blue. Yeah?
So for the ARM versus thumb, you can see that the function there is in thumb mode because the offsets vary by 2 for the most part. If you look at the number, it's I think 578. Then the next one is 57A. So the difference is only 2 bytes.
Yeah.
And that's telling you that whatever the instruction is, only requires 2 bytes to be encoded.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So it's sort of like an 8-bit processor then. 8-bit processors had these very simple instructions. Here, now it's turning blue on us, which is good. It is still figuring it out. Now this is the assembly code, which is at first rather daunting and unfriendly. IDA has added a lot of comments to make it easier, believe it or not. They're in the text section, which is the part that has executable code, and it defines some variables here, and here's where it's going to push something, add something, subtract something, move something. That's what these things do. The B's are branch instructions, and often, so I think a BL is what you use to call a subroutine. There's a few of those. Anyway, when it's done, it'll put a message down here saying preliminary analysis done or something like that, and I'm going to wait for that before we go ahead here. Although, I can start to explore it now, and maybe I will, but I think I'd rather give it a minute to finish.
I think what would be interesting is if you make the window on the left side wider so we can see the whole thing. Because right now, whatever it does is actually hidden, so we don't see what the function is.
Yeah, so, well, you can see some of them. And you may remember, we talked about this before, there are some encryption routines here. So these are the functions that it has, and one of them is start, which is where it's going to jump to when it's done. And so I can search here. I select one of these and do search. I can find start. And here's start end to background. There's another thing that starts the entire program, but it's where it goes by default. It'll jump there when it's done, and it is a real anticlimax. The start for complicated code like this is just a block of code that seems to go nowhere. All it does is set up some kind of conditions and then jump into the app in a way that is not easy to find.
So the start is actually open on the right side.
That's the start. So how do I get this into graph mode? I can't until it's done analyzing, right? Nope, there we are, good. Spacebar got me here. All right, here I can show you what I wanted to show you. This is graph mode, where instead of just showing me all the assembly code line by line, it puts it in little blocks. A block of code will then branch and go somewhere else. For some reason, both for Windows code and this iPhone code, the original start function doesn't seem to lead anywhere. It just seems to be a block of instructions setting something up and not going anywhere. So if there's a way to actually find your way to the next step here, I haven't been able to find it. So what I do is jump into a function I can understand or a string I can understand. But the place it sends me, and it calls start, does not apparently lead into a thing. Yeah.
I can show you where it goes. So if
Where do
you
you go?
scroll down, so
Yeah.
this function, when it exits, it will basically quit the program. But it does call out to the actual main of the application, and that's the UI application main. So
This thing, I tried that. So if you point to this,
Yeah.
it will show you where it goes. If I double click this, it should go there, right?
Yep. That's right.
I tried that before. Now again, I'm nowhere. And again, it doesn't seem to go anywhere.
Loads the address of the
Yep.
function into the program counter. So then it will execute it. So
Right, so I need to find out what's in R12, which is certainly not obvious.
no, it's whatever that memory address is.
So here.
In order to know what it goes to, you have to go to that pointer.
And then back by this much. So that's pretty user hostile in my opinion.
What happens if you press Q?
Q?
Yeah. That's the address. So
Oh, Q makes it calculated or something?
no, Q will just give you the actual value rather than showing you some alpha that may not.
Okay, and now I can go here,
You can go there and
now I'm in some part of the code. Good, okay. Well, anyway, let me show you the trick I was going to use, which is I know I want to find the encrypt routine. So I just click anywhere here, and then search, and I look for encrypt. All right. And so here's the first thing that encrypts passwords. If you double click it, it will show me the code that does that. Now let me shove this away. All right, so here's how this works. I've got a block of code here that does something. Then I got an arrow that goes to the next block. This is an unconditional jump. There's just one arrow in dark blue. So it does this, which is really pretty boring. All it does is shovel some data around. Nothing looks like a calculation that makes any sense. Then it goes down here and does more stuff that doesn't appear to make any sense. And let me just point out the fundamental rule for this for beginners. You are confronted with a lot of complicated stuff that is hard to understand. So ignore all of it except the part you can see. I don't know if you saw, there used to be a Far Side cartoon where someone is talking to their dog. Now, Ginger, when you jump up on the couch, it makes me very angry. Now, Ginger, I'm going to take you and send you the, all she hears is blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 Ginger. The only thing the dog hears is her name. Take this attitude. So I don't know what all this garbage is. Look over here for something I can see. Set clear, set ref encrypted. Here's the string encrypted. So it's doing something about encryption, but none of it is immediately obvious what it's doing, and on you go. This is the end of the function user encrypt password. What happened is it did encrypt the password, but it didn't do it in this code. All this code did was set something up and call another subroutine. So I can just search for the next function that uses the word encryption. Search again. Encrypt password we looked at. Here's another one, encrypt init. If I double click it, again I see some code which has something to do with encryption, but as the name might give you a tip, this just prepares the initialization of something that's going to hold the encryption. Again, it doesn't really do it in any way that's obvious, so forget that. And go on to the next one. Encrypt encrypted is just, again, doesn't really seem to be doing anything except loading up some things. So search again. Encrypt clear, again, just seems to be loading a couple variables and then calling some other routine that does all the work. So if you find confusing stuff, keep going and see if you can find something that's not confusing when you're a beginner. Here's something called encrypt find in key, suggesting that there is a key. And it goes through some kind of things. By the way, this is an if. There's a true condition that will go this way and a false condition that will go that way. That's why there's two arrows coming out. And you could figure it out, but I'm just looking. Again, all this doesn't seem easy to understand, and I'm just going to look for yet another one. Set clear. This is the one that actually has something I can understand in it easily, which is down here. It's going to show those strings. And I think we talked about this before. We're looking at the Android app. This has got these strings, which are in fact 64 characters in a simple order. And this is how the thing works. Remember from black box analysis before on the Android app, we just looked at the network traffic and we watched how this thing works. It just shifts everything forward about 5 or 6 spaces in the alphabet. It's the Caesar cipher. So here's the alphabet, it makes a string, and it's just going to find the current letter in the string, and then like add 5 to it, and call that the encrypted letter. And these strings are what's going to use that, and what's going to happen down here is the code that does that, this umodg3. Unfortunately, you can't see pseudocode. IDA does have the ability to generate pseudocode, but only if you get the pay version. And the pay version is like $6,000. This is like even more insane than Photoshop. So I actually put in a request for grant money to get the pay version, but I don't think it's going to happen this semester. But it's in the pipeline because they're showering money on us for teaching cybersecurity, which I appreciate. But it takes a while to get filtered through the layers of bureaucracy. Anyway, so the free version is all we got. But Hopper generates pseudocode, and I'll demonstrate that next time. Anyway, I think that's as far as I went in this project, where you just get to find a little bit that you can understand. And I'm planning to have another project where we cover some more details of how this thing works. But that's just the first step. Most people see something like this and they just give up and drop the course and go do something else. But you can't take that attitude. This is an extremely important program. There really ought to be whole classes just in this. There are people who do nothing but stare at this thing all day, take apart binaries and viruses and stuff, and they learn all the shortcuts and all the fancy things, and they get a really big screen, like a person that uses Photoshop to really make beautiful images. This really can get to the bottom of anything if you're good enough at using it. And so we're just scratching the surface here, but I'm hoping to have this project and one more to get you familiar with maybe the top 8 or 10 features of this program. And then it's just a lot of practice to learn to be a reverse engineer. Anyway, any questions about anything? Well, that's it. I'm going to clean up here and go over to the lab, Science 314, and help anybody who wants to work over there. All right.